Hello, and welcome to the Formal Review. Today, we'll be talking about the 2021 film, Last Night in Soho. So sit back, relax, grab your drinks. Let's talk about this movie.
What's up, everyone, and welcome back to the Formal Review. This is Season 4, Episode 22, and I thank you all for tuning in once again. So this episode will be an analysis on the newest Edgar Wright film, and then there'll be a ranking of where it stands in his overall film catalog, so stay tuned.
Have you ever thought about starting your own podcast? When I was trying to get this podcast off the ground, I had a lot of questions, like how do I record an episode? How do I get my show into all the apps that people like to listen on? How do I make money from my podcast? The answer to every single one of those questions is really simple. Anchor. Anchor is a one-stop shop for recording, hosting, and distributing my podcast. And best of all, it's absolutely 100% free and ridiculously easy to use. And now Anchor can match you with some great sponsors. That means you can get paid to podcast right away. In fact, that's exactly what I'm doing right now. So if you've always wanted to start a podcast and make money doing it, go to anchor.fm/start to join me and the diverse community of podcasters already using Anchor. Again, that's anchor.fm/start. And I can't wait to hear your podcast.
Now, before I get into anything, I do want to preface this episode with a slight spoiler warning. I will do my best to keep the analysis fairly vague so not to completely ruin the film for you. However, as I always say, go see the film first before you hear what I have to say about it so you fully understand everything. Now, I will have two parts to this analysis. One is the spoiler-free section and the other will be the spoiler section. And I'll let you know when I start doing the spoiler section. So if you can pause the episode, watch the film, and then come back and listen to that bit. But if you don't care about that, just keep listening. Also, I know I talk about this at the end, but the data shows that most people don't listen to that part, so I want to talk about it here and reiterate the importance of leaving reviews on your favorite subscription services. I do read those because I do want to grow, because these episodes are really for all you listeners out there, and I want to keep this entertaining. So what do you want to hear? Do you want to hear games? Do you want to hear more of the 4K stuff? Do you want to hear me talk about a certain movie? If you want to come on and talk to me about something, if you want to debate, I'm always open to do stuff like that, so you can always reach out to me on social media. I always want to grow and improve, and
just because something works doesn't mean that it cannot be improved.
So if there's something that you want me to improve on, let me know, and I will grow as such. So let's get back to the movie at hand. So sit back, relax, grab your drinks, and let's talk about this movie. Last Night in Soho is a psychological horror film directed and co-written by Edgar Wright. It stars Thomasin McKenzie, Anya Taylor-Joy, Matt Smith, Michael Zhao, Terrence Stamp, and Diana Rigg. The film centers around Ellie, who's played by McKenzie, who is this aspiring fashion designer traveling to London to start school. In her bedroom, she is mysteriously able to enter the 1960s, where she encounters a dazzling wannabe singer named Sandy, who is played by Taylor-Joy. However, the glamour is not everything that it appears to be, and to say honestly anything more will be spoiler territory. Now, in short, this film is a huge step away from Wright's past films. With this film, he dives more into the horror genre than he has ever before. Now, his Cornetto trilogy of Shaun of the Dead, Hot Fuzz, and At World's End do have horror aspects to them, but they are more made to make the audience laugh. This film has creepy moments, and the story is more mature than, for example, guys trying to prevent alien invasion by doing a pub crawl. This isn't a horror film that's really meant to scare you in the same way that It or Scream are meant to. It honestly has a point that is trying to be made. Now, this isn't exactly realistic horror, and it isn't exactly fantasy horror either. As I discussed in the Halloween series I did this year, the former is more about fears we have about ourselves and the world we actually live in. It takes something that we take for for granted and takes that away. Now, the latter deals with creating new fears in an audience such as boogeyman or monsters. However, during the 1960s and 70s, films like The Exorcist, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and The Omen were able to bridge this gap between horror fantasy and horror realism. And this film does the same. Wright is able to take the script and transport the audience to a time when Thunderball was the most anticipated movie in the world, and when living in the big city meant anything was possible if the dream was strong enough. However, Wright shows that the past is not as pleasant as maybe one thinks it is. Maybe there are nightmares under all of those dreams. Okay, so that's the spoilers-free section. Go see this film, and you probably won't regret it. Now, the rest of this episode will be spoilers, so proceed with caution. You have been warned. So the story starts off with Ellie moving to London as a university student at this fashion institute. She then moves out of student housing because she's bullied by some of her classmates based on her background and the way she dresses. She then moves into a loft in Soho, but when she falls asleep, she travels back to the 1960s. While there, she follows/embodies a singer named Sandy as she attempts to make it big in London. Now, every night she journeys back to see Sandy's life, but she slowly realizes that not all is shiny in the 1960s. Mackenzie, mostly known for her role in Jojo Rabbit, as Ellie is utterly fantastic in this film. Her character's arc is easily relatable even if one isn't a country girl moving to the big city because of her ability to play the role so convincingly. You feel for her as she starts her journey leaving her grandmother's house for the big city of London. Her grandmother tries to warn her that London, quote, can be a lot, which is felt when Ellie first arrives, and there's this cab driver interaction that is somewhat dark and threatening. Then she struggles through her first few nights at school due to bullying, and then she tries to get her own place. And this place is owned by Mrs. Collins, who is played by the late Diana Rigg in her final performance. Now, this change of housing is what gets her to be introduced to Sandy, and she is played absolutely wonderfully by Taylor-Joy. Interestingly, Taylor-Joy was originally cast as Ellie, but as the production progressed and then Mackenzie was brought on board, they decided to switch the characters, and this really worked well to show the difference between the shy and unassuming contemporary student compared to the street-smart 60s star. But as the film progresses, they actually become more similar than different. Now, as I've stated multiple times, the 1960s aren't as happy as Ellie thinks they were. Sandy starts being involved in the prostitution world, in the crime world, and this has effects on Ellie's reality. Now, I'm not going to go into everything that happens, but the film does keep you on the edge of your seat, trying to figure out who is who and hope that Ellie can really make it out alive and honestly sane. Now, Wright really makes the city of London a character of its own. It starts off as this somewhat safe and comfortable place, but then starts to change and turn ugly. And in itself, the city becomes a predator that closes in around both Sandy and Ellie. Now, Wright is showing the audience two women's stories that are weaved together extremely well, and each one complements and enhances the other. Now, unfortunately, what happens to Sandy in the story isn't that original, but the environment that she lives in is unique. Wright really is able to show how exciting the 1960s seems. In real life, people always talk about how great the past is and that they belong in a different era. And even fashion today takes a lot of inspiration from that time and looked at as retro. Now, in this film, Ellie wants to escape to this so-called better place for her appreciation of the time, or really just to escape from her real-life problems. But as with stories like this, trying to escape something forever will show that honestly the grass isn't always greener on the other side. And Ellie starts seeing that this woman that she's following and embodying, who went to the big city in a very similar way that she did with a dream, starts to spiral down into a place in a fairly similar way that has been shown in film before. In the real world, Ellie deals with possible mental issues that may contribute to her seeing the past and the characters in it. And this is one of the small issues with the film, with its depiction of mental health. Now, I'm not a psychologist or a psychiatrist, so I can only base my knowledge on the research that I've done involving these two fields. However, my main point is that the film never commits to if the ghosts are actually there fire or if it's from a mental illness. The film early on says that her mother committed suicide and that some of her family members do suffer from schizophrenia, but there's not a clear indication if that's exactly what's happening to Ellie. It does seem that they're trying to give the idea that the mental illness causes it, but there wasn't a concrete yes or no. Now, according to the American Psychiatric Association, schizophrenia is a chronic brain disorder that affects less than 1% of the US population, and some symptoms can include delusions and hallucinations. Now, symptoms of schizophrenia usually first appear in early adulthood and must persist for at least 6 months for this diagnosis. Now, men often experience initial symptoms in their late teens or early 20s, while women tend to show first signs of the illness in their 20s and early 30s. Now, this would obviously fall in line with the film. However, again, the film only says that Ellie has a quote-unquote gift that could be seen as either a paranormal psychic power or a sign of mental illness. Even Wright and his co-writer Christy Wilson Carnes, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, have said that Ellie isn't mentally ill. And when describing a scene where Ellie ends up at a police station trying to explain herself and all that she has seen and also experienced, the male police officers look at her like she's crazy, but the female officer tries to relate to her more. Up to this point, they've shown Ellie's journey in a way that really shows everything that Ellie has seen, and the male police officers don't listen to her. Now, Wright and Wilson Carnes also stated that this was done to show how a lot of women have been put in similar rooms and have not been listened to when they've had something to say and were not listened to by men. And this makes sense with the rest of the themes that this film deals with, such as sexual violence, race, and class, that again are very, very new for Edgar Wright. However, leaving the cause of why Ellie can see ghosts and everything to ambiguity is a problem when they seem to be hinting at multiple things, and then the writers definitely say it's not one of them. However, if it isn't a mental illness, then what's the point of bringing it into the equation? Is it only to add ambiguity? If so, it can be said that the film depicts people with mental illness as just being crazy, which is unfortunately a trope in film, which is honestly a problem in and of itself. But if it's not that, like they say, then what's the point? In regard to the acts of violence in the film, it may also be a little too real for some. The violence is shown to be very exaggerated for dramatic effect, but because of this real life applicability, it can be difficult to watch for some. If you've had a problem watching the content of Promising Young Woman, you may have very similar issues with this film. Both of them show what happens when there's violence against women. However, I feel that it shows it as an existing thing that happens, and until it stops, it should be shown. However, I understand it when some people say that this entire thing could make viewers desensitized to things such as this, which also shouldn't happen either. Now, this also brings into the conversation if Wright was the right person to do this film. Now, he did work with Wilson Carnes on the screenplay, but some of the film definitely feels more about the male side of the story, meaning, does he really show the hardships and emotion that someone in Sandy's perspective would go through? Doesn't seem like it. Now, as a man, I felt that the situation was painful to watch, but I did not get the same feeling that I got with Promising Young Woman. Now, this is not to say that Wright does a bad job in any way, it's only different. And it's the same thing of when Catherine Bigelow directed Detroit a few years ago. While she got parts of the film correct in showing certain characters' emotions, there are some of the characters that she may not know all of the emotion that goes into a specific scene. And again, this is not to say that either of these directors do a poor job. In fact, both of them do a fantastic job. But when there's such a heavily emotional scene, it's hard for a director who hasn't gone through something to know 100% how to direct somebody to go through this specific scenario. I didn't honestly have that big of a problem with it, but it is something to bring to the equation. Now, having said all that, the rest of the film is absolutely beautiful. Wright and his cinematographer Chung Hoon Chung use colors and especially red in very striking ways that that really give this film an elegant vibe. It's a neo-noir thriller that really shows danger by accentuating the ghosts, and then the ghosts themselves are also done extremely well and are very creepy. Their design fits very well into the story, and the meaning behind their look fits with the film's theme of sexual violence. Now, visually, this film is stunning, and there are some gorgeous period pieces that really will place the audience right in this world. Honestly, the cinematography is amazing to look at. The casting too was terrific, with both women playing their different but similar characters to perfection. Honestly, this is perhaps Wright's best film, and if not, it's his most technically proficient film. Certain scenes are framed and shot so beautifully, and others are absolutely frightening. The only other thing that is slightly problematic is that it does drag a little bit. It isn't a big issue, but there is only a lot happening in the story. Outside of that and the mental health illness ambiguity, the film is extremely well done. It does so many things right. See what I did there? And it is perhaps one of the best ghost stories done recently. It is an amazing film, and fans of Edgar Wright are sure to be pleased. So, as a director, here's my ranking from quote-unquote worst, because Wright really hasn't done a bad film, to his best. Now, I started off at number 6 with Baby Driver. Then, with number 5, Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. Number 4, The World's End. Number 3, Shaun of the Dead. Number 2, Hot Fuzz. And number 1 is this film. Now, what did y'all think of it, and what is your Edgar Wright ranking? Let me know. Hit me up on social media.
The Formal Review is on Facebook, Twitter, and the Gram, and also YouTube. The handle's all the same. It's at The Formal Review. And for anyone who has supported me on a financial basis, I thank you very much for supporting me in that way. For anyone who wants to support, you can go to anchor.fm/formal review and click support this podcast, and any donation is appreciated. Thank you all again for tuning in. And until next time, wash your hands, get vaccinated, or if not, wear a mask. And I'll see you at the movies.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of The Formal Review. Cheers, and we'll see you next time.